There's a pattern in international economics that has systematically destroyed three rival economies to the United States in the last 100 years, each time using the exact same seven-stage sequence. The mathematics are precise, the results are predictable, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And right now, in 2025, China is following that exact same pattern. Currency pressures mounting, trade wars escalating, capital flight accelerating, almost like watching a replay of Japan in 1985, but at triple speed. The yuan has already begun its appreciation cycle. The stimulus panic is visible in real time. In 1930, the British Empire controlled 25% of global trade. The pound sterling was the undisputed reserve currency. Within 40 years, sterling lost that status, and Britain became the sick man of Europe. In 1985, Japan was poised to overtake America economically. Sony was buying Hollywood. Toyota was destroying Detroit. Within 5 years, they entered a lost decade that became 3. In 2008, the European Union's economy rivaled America's, $16.2 trillion versus $14.7 trillion. The euro threatened dollar dominance. Within 18 months, the sovereign debt crisis began a decline they still haven't recovered from. Notice the pattern? 40 years, 5 years, 18 months. Each collapse happens faster than the last. And here's what should terrify anyone holding Chinese assets or betting on the Asian century. China has already completed 4 of the 7 stages. The next one, asset bubble formation, starts when stimulus meets desperation. Based on the mathematical progression, they have less than 2 years. This is the story of how dominant economies eliminate rivals through financial warfare, why countries walk willingly into the trap even knowing the history, and why China's response to U.S. pressure will determine whether the pattern claims its 4th victim. The past writes the future, and the pattern never lies. Before we dive into how Britain, Japan, and Europe fell, let me define the pattern that destroyed them all. 7 stages, always the same sequence, always voluntary, always fatal. Trade imbalance weaponization. The dominant power highlights trade deficits as existential threats. Media campaigns, political rhetoric, academic papers, creating public pressure for action. Voluntary negotiation theater. The target nation is invited to voluntary negotiations. The threat of tariffs and trade wars makes cooperation seem like the better option. Currency appreciation trap. The target agrees to strengthen its currency, crippling export competitiveness. Central bank interventions, market pressures, usually 30 to 50% appreciation within 18 to 24 months. Domestic stimulus panic. The target floods its economy with cheap money to offset the damage. Interest rate cuts, fiscal stimulus, financial deregulation, asset bubble formation. All that cheap money creates massive bubbles. Stocks, real estate, speculation replaces productive investment. Sudden reversal. The bubble bursts when stimulus is withdrawn or external shock hits. Asset prices collapse faster than they rose. Permanent stagnation. Decades of low growth and deflation. Debt overhang. Zombie companies. Lost generations. Now let me show you how this played out 3 times. Same pattern. Devastating results. Let's start with the British Empire at its absolute peak in 1930. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency, used in 60% of global trade. London was the undisputed financial capital, controlling credit flows to 6 continents. Britain controlled 25% of the world's land surface and 23% of its population. The Royal Navy's 300 warships protected trade routes that made British merchants wealthy beyond imagination. But beneath the imperial grandeur, the rot was already total. America had been planning sterling's demise since 1918, when it became clear that economic power was shifting across the Atlantic. This is stage 1 of every economic assassination. Weaponize the trade numbers. Starting in 1931, the U.S. Treasury began publishing reports showing Britain's trade deficits with its own colonies. The message was clear. The empire was bleeding money. In 1932, U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull gave 17 speeches about unsustainable British trade practices. By 1933, American newspapers ran weekly stories about sterling's artificial value. Britain's trade deficit reached £120 million by 1931, equivalent to £8 billion today. This alone doesn't cause collapse, but it creates the political pressure for Stage 2. Stage 2. Voluntary negotiation theatre. Make them think they have a choice. In 1945, Britain was bankrupt from World War II, owing America $31 billion. Lord Keynes flew to Washington thinking he'd negotiate gentlemen's terms with old allies. Instead, American negotiators demanded Britain dismantle imperial preference, known, the tariff system that protected sterling, accept or face immediate bankruptcy, U.S. Negotiator Will Clayton told Keynes, "The British Empire is a luxury you can no longer afford." Keynes called it absolute hell, but Britain signed. Stage 3 could begin. Stage 3 hit Britain like a sledgehammer in July 1947. The loan terms required Britain to make sterling fully convertible. Anyone holding pounds could exchange them for dollars at $4.03. Within 6 weeks, Britain lost $1 billion in reserves as everyone fled sterling. By August 20, 1947, convertibility was suspended, but the damage was done. Sterling's value plummeted 30% by year-end. This is the point of no return. When a currency loses credibility, it never fully recovers. Stage 4. Domestic stimulus. Panic began immediately. Chancellor Stafford Cripps slashed interest rates from 3% to 0.5% in 1948. The government launched massive housing programs, nationalized industries, and created the NHS, all funded by printed money. Government spending rose from 37% to 43% of GDP between 1947 and 1951. Stage 5. Asset bubble formation was inevitable. London property prices tripled between 1948 and 1955. Stock markets hit records despite industrial decline. British investors borrowed sterling at 0.5% to buy dollar assets yielding 4%, a carry trade that would end in tears. By 1956, speculation replaced production. Britain built more casinos than factories. Then came Suez, and Stage 6 arrived with devastating suddenness. November 6, 1956. Britain invaded Egypt to retake the Suez Canal. America's response was economic warfare. President Eisenhower personally threatened to dump U.S. holdings of sterling unless Britain withdrew within 48 hours. Sterling crashed 15% in 3 days. The Bank of England burned through £300 million in reserves trying to defend it. Prime Minister Eden resigned in disgrace. Britain withdrew from Suez. The empire was finished. Stage 7, permanent stagnation, lasted until the 1980s. Britain became the sick man of Europe, begging the IMF for bailouts in 1976. Today, sterling trades at $1.27, down 70% from its 1940s peak. London's financial dominance is history. The lesson of Britain: when currency credibility dies, empires follow. Let's jump forward to 1985. Different century, different victim, identical pattern. Just like Britain, Japan thought it was different. It had the technology, the work ethic, the trade surplus. But this time, the pattern worked even faster. What took Britain 40 years would take Japan just 5. And it all started with a meeting at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Let's talk about Japan in 1985, when American executives were learning Japanese, and books predicted the 21st century would belong to Tokyo. Japan's trade surplus with America hit $49 billion. Sony was buying Columbia Pictures. Mitsubishi would soon own Rockefeller Center. Japanese cars weren't just cheaper, they were better. GM and Ford were hemorrhaging market share. American electronics? Dead. MIT economists projected Japan's GDP would overtake America's by 2000. In Congress, representatives smashed Toshiba radios with sledgehammers. Tokyo real estate was worth more than all of California. Japanese businessmen bought Van Gogh like baseball cards. But beneath the bubble economy glamour, Japan had already walked into the trap. Stage 1 began in 1983, when the U.S. trade deficit hit 3% of GDP. Senator Lloyd Benson's unfair trade hearings featured American auto workers testifying about lost jobs. The media message was coordinated. Japan was stealing American prosperity. By 1985, Congress had introduced 300 protectionist bills targeting Japan. The Gephardt Amendment would have imposed 25% tariffs on all Japanese goods. Every week, new reports highlighted the deficit, $49 billion and growing. Japan exported $37 billion in cars alone. Polls showed 72% of Americans viewed Japan as an economic threat, higher than the Soviet military threat. Japan's MITI understood: cooperate or face economic war. Stage 2 was about to begin. Stage 2, the Plaza Accord, presented as a multilateral agreement, but actually an ultimatum. September 22, 1985, Plaza Hotel, New York. 5 nations meeting, but only one target, Japan. Treasury Secretary James Baker's message was blunt: appreciate the yen voluntarily, or Congress passes the tariffs. Finance Minister Noboru Takeshita saw no choice. Trade war would destroy Japan's entire economic model. The communiqué used diplomatic language: orderly appreciation of non-dollar currencies. Markets understood: destroy the yen's competitiveness. The dollar fell 4% within hours. Traders knew what was coming, but even they underestimated Stage 3's devastation. Here's what the Plaza Accord really meant. Japan had just signed its own economic death warrant. Stage 3, currency appreciation trap. The yen went from 240 to the dollar to 120 in just 24 months. Think about what that means. Every dollar of export revenue suddenly worth 50% fewer yen. Toyota's profits halved. Sony's margins destroyed. Japanese export growth went from 9.5% to negative 4.7% in 18 months. GDP growth stalled completely in Q1 1986. By March 1986, finance ministry officials were in full crisis mode. Industrial production falling, unemployment rising. Here's the crucial detail: America kept the pressure on. Not enough, said Baker. The yen kept rising. By 1987, it hit 120. Major exporters openly discussed bankruptcy, which triggered Stage 4, the panic response that would destroy Japan. Stage 4, Japan's panicked stimulus, makes the Fed's 2008 response look conservative. The Bank of Japan slashed rates from 5% to 2.5% between 1986 and 1987, the most aggressive cuts in its history. The 1987 emergency package, 6 trillion yen in spending. Public works everywhere, bridges to nowhere. Finance Ministry removed centuries-old lending restrictions. Banks could now lend against land, previously forbidden. Corporate tax cuts, investment incentives, special depreciation allowances, anything to restart growth. Bank lending grew 15% annually. To whom? Anyone with a pulse and a property deed. All that money had to go somewhere. Stage 5 was inevitable. Stage 5, the greatest asset bubble in human history. The Nikkei went from 13,000 to 39,000 in 3 years. NTT's IPO valued the phone company at more than all German stocks combined. Central Tokyo land prices rose 300%. The Imperial Palace grounds were theoretically worth more than California. Membership in exclusive golf clubs traded for $3 million. Companies made more profit from financial speculation than making products. Mitsui Real Estate built an indoor ski resort in Tokyo. 24-hour trading floors. Sushi delivered by helicopter. The few who warned of bubbles were dismissed as not understanding the Japanese miracle. Then came December 29, 1989, the last trading day of the decade. The peak, December 29, 1989. Nikkei closes at 38,957. It would never see that level again. January 1990. New BOJ Governor Yasushi Mieno raises rates to normalize. The bubble was pricked. By October 1990, the Nikkei had fallen 50%. Property prices began their 20-year decline. Banks holding inflated collateral faced insolvency. Iconic names destroyed. Yamaichi Securities, Japan's oldest brokerage. Bankrupt 1997. Long-term credit bank. Nationalized. Hundreds of regional banks. Merged. Or folded. Lifetime employment ended. Salarymen who'd bought apartments at the peak faced negative equity until retirement. Youth unemployment hit records. The lost decade became lost decades, deflation, zombie companies. 0 interest rates for 20 years. The Nikkei finally passed its 1989 peak in 2024, 35 years later. Property? Still below bubble peaks. Japan's share of global GDP? Halved. An entire generation of Japanese learned, don't invest, don't spend, don't dream, just survive. The lesson of Japan: financial weapons are more devastating than military ones. No bombs fell, but the damage was total. If Japan's destruction took 5 years, Europe's would take just 18 months. By 2008, financial warfare had evolved. No formal accords needed, just market pressure and rating agencies. The European Union, 60% of its economy in the crosshairs: Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain. And it started with a confession from a small country that most Americans couldn't find on a map. Let's examine Europe in 2008. When the euro was crushing the dollar and Brussels bureaucrats dreamed of dethroning American financial hegemony, the EU's combined GDP had surpassed America's: $16.2 trillion versus $14.7 trillion. The euro had appreciated 60% against the dollar since launch. European banks were eating Wall Street's lunch. Deutsche Bank, BNP Paribas, Barclays, all expanding aggressively into dollar territory. Central banks were diversifying reserves from dollars to euros. Oil producers openly discussed euro pricing. The dollar's monopoly was cracking, Spanish coastal properties booming, Greek public servants retiring at 50, Italian fashion houses buying Manhattan real estate. But underneath, Europe had recreated Japan's mistake: monetary union without fiscal union. One currency, 27 different debt levels. Wall Street knew exactly which thread to pull. The pattern was about to claim its third victim. Stage 1 began October 2009, when Greece's new government discovered the real deficit: 15.4% of GDP, not the reported 3.7%. Here's what nobody talks about. Goldman Sachs had helped Greece hide debt through currency swaps since 2001. They knew exactly when to pull the plug. Within days, American financial media ran coordinated stories: Greek contagion, PIIG's crisis, Euro doom loop. Credit rating agencies, all three American, began synchronized downgrades: Greek bonds, investment grade to junk, in 6 months. Stage 2 played out differently. No Plaza Accord needed. Markets did the negotiating. IMF Managing Director Dominique Strauss-Kahn delivered the message: accept austerity or face expulsion from the euro. The pattern repeated. Ireland, November 2010. Portugal, May 2011. Spain, June 2012. Cyprus, March 2013. Each bailout followed the same template: savage spending cuts, privatization of state assets, and effective loss of fiscal sovereignty. Here's the financial weapon they innovated for Europe. Instead of currency appreciation, weaponize borrowing costs. Stage 3 innovation. Instead of currency appreciation, weaponize borrowing costs. Greek 10-year yields went from 4% to 35% in 18 months. At those rates, debt service consumes the entire budget. The genius: make each country's crisis trigger the next. Greek collapse raises Italian yields. Italian stress threatens Spain. Portuguese yields: 5% to 17% in 5 months. Irish yields: 4% to 14% in 7 months. Faster than any currency attack. American hedge funds made billions shorting European bonds, while US banks pulled credit lines. Countries faced impossible math. Can't grow with austerity, can't borrow at 20% rates, can't devalue with shared currency, which triggered the same panicked response as Japan: Stage 4 stimulus, but with a twist. Stage 4. ECB President Draghi's famous July 2012 promise: whatever it takes. Negative interest rates, charging banks to hold money, 60 billion euros monthly asset purchases, lending facilities acronym SOUP, LTRO, TLTRO, OMT. The real numbers: ECB balance sheet exploded from 2 trillion euros to 7 trillion euros, bigger than Japan's entire GDP. European Stability Mechanism, Banking Union, Corona Recovery Fund, all backdoor money printing, avoiding treaty restrictions. Stage 5 manifests differently but identically: negative yielding bonds, $17 trillion at peak insanity. Berlin property up 150% despite population decline. Amsterdam, Paris, Lisbon, all in bubble territory. 16% of European companies are zombies, only alive due to free money. Double Japan's peak percentage. European Bitcoin trading volumes exceeded America's. SPACs, NFTs, meme stocks, retail mania. ECB itself warned about bubbles while creating them. Classic Stage 5 denial. Then came 2022's inflation shock. Stage 6 arrived with mathematical precision. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. Energy crisis meets inflation. ECB forced to raise rates. German 10-year yields: negative 0.5% to positive 2.5% in 9 months. the fastest reversal in history. March 2023, Credit Suisse collapses. Deutsche Bank CDS spreads explode. European banking crisis barely contained. German industrial production down 15%. UK gilt market crisis. Italian debt sustainability questioned again. Swedish property prices down 15%. German commercial real estate. First defaults beginning. The bubble deflates. Eurozone growth 0.1%. Productivity declining. Innovation fled to America. Demographics terminal. Europe perfected the Japanese model. Permanent stimulus, zombie companies, demographic collapse, but 3 times faster. Christine Lagarde admits, we may need to maintain support indefinitely. Translation, Stage 7 is permanent. Britain, 40 years. Japan, 5 years. Europe, 18 months from crisis to stagnation. The pattern perfects itself. Europe proves financial weapons now work at digital speed. No recovery, no escape, just managed decline. 3 times. 3 victims. Same 7 stages, just faster each time. Now it's China's turn. $17 trillion economy, challenging dollar dominance, exactly like Japan in 1985. And Beijing has already completed 4 of the 7 stages. They're 1 agreement away from stage 5. If the pattern holds, and it always has, we're about to witness the fastest economic collapse in human history. Now let's talk about China in 2025, where this pattern is playing out in real time, but at unprecedented speed. 3 empires, 3 collapses. Britain took 40 years, Japan took 5, Europe took 18 months. China has been in this pattern since 2018, when Trump launched the trade war. They're now in stage 4 of 7. At the current pace, China could complete all 7 stages by 2027. That's not speculation, that's mathematical progression. Let me show you exactly where China is in each stage. Trade imbalance weaponization, complete. Started 2018. Trump's first tariffs on $50 billion of Chinese goods. The rhetoric identical to 1985 Japan. Unfair trade, currency manipulation, stealing jobs, China's trade surplus with U.S. $419 billion in 2018. Painted as existential threat. 300-plus congressional hearings on China threat since 2019, exceeding Japan's count. Check. Stage 1, complete. Voluntary negotiation theater, complete. January 2020. Phase 1 trade deal signed in White House. China voluntarily agreed to buy $200 billion more US goods. Impossible target. Just like Plaza Accord. Presented as mutual benefit. Actually one-sided capitulation. Beijing knew the alternative. Tech embargo, financial exclusion, full decoupling. Check. Stage 2 complete. Currency appreciation trap. Complete. The yuan appreciated from 7.15 to 6.35 between 2020 and 2022. 12% rise. Not as dramatic as Japan's 50% yet, but consider, China's margins are thinner. Export competitiveness already damaged. Vietnam, India eating market share. Beijing desperately trying controlled depreciation. But U.S. Congress threatens retaliation. Check. Stage 3, initiated and ongoing. Domestic stimulus panic. In progress now. This is where China sits today, flooding the system with liquidity. PBOC has cut rates 7 times since 2022. Reserve requirements at historic lows. Local government financing vehicles. $9 trillion in hidden debt, dwarfing Japan's bubble. Infrastructure stimulus. Bridges to nowhere. Ghost cities. Unused airports. Corporate subsidies making EVs, solar panels at massive losses just to maintain employment. We're watching stage 4 in real time. The panic is visible. Asset bubble formation. Beginning. Early signs already visible despite property crash. That's the paradox. Stock market intervention. National team. Buying to prop up prices. Shadow banking at $13 trillion. Larger than Japan's entire banking system at peak. New bubbles forming. EVs 800-plus manufacturers. AI 17,000 new companies in 2023. Semiconductors. When property reflates, and stimulus ensures it will, stage 5 completes. Sudden reversal. Coming next. The triggers are lining up. Demographics workforce shrinking 10 million per year. Taiwan crisis could provide external shock, like Suez for Britain, or simple math. debt service exceeding growth, forcing policy reversal, based on pattern timing, likely by 2026 to 2027. Permanent stagnation, the mathematical end. Japan, with Chinese characteristics, zombie soes, deflation, youth unemployment. But worse, China lacks Japan's accumulated wealth, faces hostile West. Projection. China's global GDP share peaks at 18%, declines to 12% by 2040. The middle-income trap becomes permanent. The China dream dies. But the evidence of China following this pattern doesn't stop there. Youth unemployment, 23.5% and rising. They stopped publishing the data. Capital flight, $450 billion fled in 2023 despite capital controls. Property disaster, Evergrande, Country Garden, $400 billion in defaults and counting. Manufacturing exodus, Apple, Samsung, Nike, all moving production to Vietnam, India. Financial stress, regional bank runs in Henan, Anhui, censored but verified. Demographic cliff, population fell 2 million in 2023, first decline since 1960. Tech war impact, semiconductor embargo forcing $150 billion in wasteful domestic investment. Belt and road failures, $1 trillion in bad loans from Pakistan to Zambia. Every indicator screams Stage 4 crisis. The pattern is undeniable. What would stages 5 through 7 actually look like for China? Stage 5 specifics. Shanghai apartments hit $50,000 per square meter. A-shares P/E ratios above 100. National team buying 30% of daily volume. Capital controls tighten to prevent exodus. Stage 6 trigger scenarios. A Taiwan move forcing Western sanctions. Or simply math. Interest payments exceeding tax revenue. Most likely, property bubble 2.0 collapses when stimulus withdrawn. Urban unemployment hits 30%. Migrant workers flood back to villages. Social credit system used to restrict protest. Middle-class wealth evaporates. The new normal, 1 to 2% growth. SOE zombies consuming resources. Innovation fled to Singapore. Youth choosing lying flat over impossible dreams. Japan stagnated peacefully. China has 1.4 billion people and nuclear weapons. The social stability risk is unprecedented. Britain thought the empire was eternal. Japan believed in unique cultural superiority. Europe assumed union meant strength. Beijing thinks party control makes them different. That socialism with Chinese characteristics breaks the pattern. But math is math. Debt is debt. Demographics are demographics. The pattern has never failed. Not once. Why would China be different? 3 times this 7-stage pattern has destroyed economic challenges to American hegemony. Britain's sterling empire lasted 40 years after stage 1 began. Japan's miracle died in 5 years. Europe managed 18 months. China entered stage 1 in 2018. They're deep in stage 4 as you watch this in 2025. At the acceleration rate, each collapse 70% faster than the last. China completes all 7 stages by 2027. We're not watching history, we're watching the future. And it's already written. 40 years, 5 years, 18 months. Next, 6 months, China faces what others didn't. Simultaneous demographic collapse, technological embargo, and property bubble burst. Social media spreads bank runs in hours, not weeks. Capital flight happens at digital speed. China is more integrated yet more vulnerable. When confidence breaks, it breaks everywhere at once. Every empire thought it was different. Every empire discovered the pattern accelerates. Not if, when. And the when is soon. Maybe Beijing can do what Tokyo couldn't. Maybe party control prevents panic. Maybe 1.4 billion consumers create internal demand. Maybe they'll avoid Japan's mistakes, Europe's structural flaws, Britain's imperial overstretch. Maybe the property bubble deflates gradually. Maybe stimulus works this time. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. The acceleration says otherwise. History doesn't just rhyme. Sometimes it repeats. Exactly. If you now see where China is in the sequence, hit subscribe. When stage 5 bubbles inflate and stage 6 triggers, you'll understand why it was inevitable. The past writes the future, and now you can read it.